Hey everyone, Tactics here, and we've had a whirlwind of Dragonflight news over the last 12 or so hours. Initially, this video is going to be about the massive loot changes that have been announced for both raiding and in general. But literally, as I was recording this video, we got the Dragonflight release date. So, November 28th. Confirmed November 28th as the Dragonflight release date. And here we have the release schedule for the first raid. So, November 28th, of course, expansion, December 12th, all three difficulties. So, they did tease this, and they are now testing it out, doing it. All three difficulties are going to release December 12th. Season 1 Mythic Plus is also going to start this day on December 12th with no restrictions at all, which makes sense seeing as Mythic is available immediately. So there's no reason to really have those restrictions in place. Raid Finder scheduling from there. Cross-faction Mythic Vault is going to be available from the very start. Hall of Fame entries require you to have 16 out of 20 raiders to be in the same guild. That's just a note. I think that's a current requirement anyway, but they're just noting, there's no cross-faction guilds obviously then planned for release. We have the dungeon rotation confirmed. We already kind of knew what this was, but basically 4 of the Dragonflight dungeons, Halls of Valor, Court, Shadow and Burial Grounds, and Temple of the Jade Serpent. Hopefully testing on that starts soon. They've also announced officially Necrotic and Inspiring are gone, and there is going to be a seasonal affix. They just don't have any more information on that yet. So, really, really big news. Looks like that leak was correct. November 28th for Dragonflight. Really, really hype. But now let's actually talk about the point of this video originally, which was this post here, which has some pretty massive changes to how looting is going to work in Dragonflight Season 1. So to give you the breakdown, I'm sure some of you do know, but maybe it's not all of you do, that group loot is making a return. So this is effectively Master Looter with more steps for high-end groups that want to use that. Basically, the boss can drop a number of loot depending on your group size, and it can be anything from the loot table, and you get that need or greed window pop up, and so you are able to kind of put that gear on whoever you want, with the caveat that obviously it's not good at targeting loot as good as personal loot is at targeting loot, right? Because personal loot, you're always going to get loot that someone could technically use, whereas like group loot, if you have like 0 hunters in your group, for example, there's a chance you still get a bow drop, right? So pros and cons of each. You get more control over who gets loot for group loot, but you get less targeted loot. So they've now announced that group loot is going to be the only method of loot distribution inside Vault of the Incarnates, the first raid. You cannot use personal loot, though some of the reagents and profession stuff is going to be personal looted. And they're going to be kind of updating the need and greed UI and making sure that it is as accurate as possible. But because of this, they're making loot trading have absolutely 0 restrictions. So you aren't going to have a certain, if you don't have the right eye level piece, hey, this ring, completely wrong stats for me, it's not good, but it's higher eye level than what I have, so I can't trade it. Now you'll be able to trade that loot. On top of this, they've also decided to add a 3rd tier of boss loot eye level within the raids. Basically, they're separating regular bosses from wing end bosses from end bosses in the raid. So Aranog, Primal Council, Senarth, and Taros are the regular bosses. They drop the base item level loot. The new intermediate tier, wing end bosses. So in this raid, there's only 2, Dathia and Kurog. They get up 6 eye level boost. And then you have the last 2 bosses of the raid, Broodkeeper and Razageth, and they're getting an additional 3 eye level on top of that. Then if you're looking at moving up to the next difficulty, because these are the normal eye levels, the first tier of Heroic, so these base bosses in Heroic, is going to be 402. So they're still going to be better than the final bosses on normal, but the gap is kind of closed, and this is kind of to kind of make you feel like, hey, these wing bosses aren't just dropping the same gear. It's a harder boss. They should have a little bit more. And I actually don't hate that line of thinking. It's kind of weird if like you're killing like this boss later on in the raid. It's a much stronger boss. You'd expect it to drop maybe slightly better loot. And now this is just kind of reinforcing that idea. So you're not like only waiting for the last 2 bosses of loot. I kind of get that. At the same time, I know it does kind of make maybe it a little bit more annoying, but I think it makes sense, and I'm a fan of at least trying this out for a tier and seeing how it goes. Now, the other thing they're talking about implementing to kind of make certain individual bosses more appealing, even if they're earlier in the raid, is by adding in unique drops. So there's going to be certain items on specific bosses that are just 6 to 7 eye levels higher than the loot table on those bosses. So if it's off of, I think an example is Aranog, the very first boss has 389 items. But actually I can go into the game here. Aranog has a very special ring here. So we have this ring here. This is 415 for Mythic as base, but there's just a 421 ring. So it has an eye level boost and a unique effect. Similarly, Senarth, I believe, no, I'm wrong. It is Broodkeeper. Broodkeeper has the other ring. This is a 424 boss, right? This is the last tier of Mythic, so this is the highest eye level stuff, 424 base. But there is just a 430 ring. Similarly, the last boss has a bow. Now, Theriax, Enemy of the Sky. Again, 430 eye level, 6 eye levels higher than the standard loot drops. And this is kind of to, at least their argument here, is to kind of retain some excitement from the earlier bosses that no longer become challenging, give more long-term goals for the difficult encounters, and make a larger push towards item level accurately reflecting the power of an item. A good example of this, which they refer to down here actually, is Edge of Night, where it was clearly very, very strong, much stronger than even the item level indicated, but it had the same kind of power level or item level rather as the rest of her loot table. So they want to distinguish items from these bosses, like the dagger, I guess they're saying should have been. So interesting item level changes for this. As I mentioned, pair of special rings from Aranog and Diurna. There's going to be a trinket that's usable by Strength, Agi, and Intellect users from Council that gets stronger with the more copies of it you have, and of course that bow that I mentioned there at the end. Now, the other major change is how BOEs are going to function. So now, BOEs are only going to drop from certain lieutenant mobs in the raid, with you're guaranteed a certain number, from what I understand, based on reading this, based on the group size you have when doing the raid itself. So BOE farming kind of dead now. You only get one shot at killing these lieutenants per week, and you know, once you kill it, if you didn't get the BOE, you're out of luck for that week. So BOE farming is going to be a little bit dead, but because they're more now consistently dropping, I guess, they're considering placing more important items in the BOE pool, like weapons or even higher item level pieces, to make it a little bit more worthwhile. So we'll see how expensive BOEs end up getting. The goal of this here is to make it sort of like a 9th boss, is getting those lieutenants. I don't know, again, we don't know where these lieutenants are, how many of them there's going to be, and how many BOEs they're intended to drop if you kill all of them. We just know that they are planning on making that consistent. So we'll have to see how that ends up working. Now, the one big thing I want to talk about, which I think is probably the elephant in the room, is group loot being forced on everybody in this raid. I think personally, as someone whose guild is probably going to exclusively use group loot, we've basically already kind of do that, right, with RC Loot Council, those kind of add-ons. It's not going to be a big change for me. It actually makes our life a lot easier for this. But what I will say is I don't know about removing personal loot. I kind of understand it, how you don't want people swapping it around. Understanding groups that are personal loot, groups that are group loot could be, an extra layer on pugs and stuff. But I do think that not having personal loot is going to be maybe a tad bit more annoying for pugs, and much, much more annoying for groups that are smaller raid groups. So not mythic raid groups. I'm talking about like, your 10, 11, 12 man heroic guilds that maybe have a lot of overlap in either armor class or classes in general, right? Like if you're just like a 10 man heroic guild, you've got like 6 leather wearers in your group. You had over 50% of your armor was going to be leather because of personal loot. And now you have no clue, right? Like you could just constantly get mail, and maybe that same group has 0 mail wearers in their raid, right? You're getting mail, you're getting bows, you're just getting stuff that's not as good for you. And so having the option of personal loot, I think, is still good to have, right? Like I think people arguing for Master Loot to come back were never also arguing for the removal of personal loot. I think personal loot serves a good purpose. It's just for different people, right? Personal loot is good for a portion of the WoW population. Group loot is good for another portion of the WoW population. I think both can coexist there. I understand it's probably it might be a bit annoying, and there might be some other issues I can't think of off the top of my head, but I think they should be able to coexist. And I mean, just having more options is always a good thing. That being said, again, for me personally, being selfish, this is better for me and my guild to have group loot be the choice and not personal loot 100%. I just do think for some guilds, this is going to be worse, right? This is objectively going to be worse for them. Overall, though, big W having the loot trading restriction absolutely removed. That is something that will help everyone, literally everyone. This is just a good change overall. Not 100% on group loot being forced on everyone, though. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I would love to know what you guys think about all these changes. What do you think about the Dragonflight release date? What do you think about Mythic, Heroic, and Normal releasing at the same time? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, if you want to stay up to date with all this Dragonflight content, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You can catch me on my stream. Not actually this week. I'm actually going on vacation tonight. So timely announcement, but I'll be back next weekend. So catch me on my Twitch stream at Tactics. Do my best to answer any questions you have, and I'll see you guys in the next video.